Weiss Schnee is the best character on Team RWBY in my opinion. I don't really think it's close. While I like the development they made with Ruby Rose in Volume 9, I don't think it's enough to make up for the other 8 volumes of lack of character development. With Weiss, I found myself liking her character for the most part. It feels like she actually grows as a person over the course of the series. However, like with everything involving RWBY, even the best characters are ones I feel like have a ton of wasted potential, and Weiss is no exception to that. I feel like her character is one that I liked a lot, but I also feel like there were a lot of holes with her character that should have been explored. In this video, I want to talk about what I like about Weiss as a character, but also the amount of wasted potential her character had. If you want to check out my video talking about the wasted potential of Ruby Rose, I'll link that video in the description below and pinned comment, so if you want to check that out, you can after watching this video. Anyways, let's talk about Weiss Schnee. I feel like with every member of Team RWBY, they aren't the same character in the 9th volume as they are in the 1st volume. Some for the better, others for the worse. However, while Weiss is one of the better characters in this regard among the 4, it is a bit interesting, because her character did have a lot of growing up to do since the start of the series. She was a rich snobby brat that had some very problematic views, we'll talk about those later, and her character was one that it felt like there was an internal conflict between what her goals were when she attended Beacon at the start versus who she was as a character when she first attended Beacon. The goal was to repair the name of the Schnee Dust Company from that piece of shit father that she has. How was she supposed to do that and repair the family name when she also was racist towards the Faunus? How was she supposed to prove that she wasn't like her father if she acted like an entitled rich brat that was the heir to the company he ran? These were questions Weiss would have to answer early on, and while her development isn't without fault, I wouldn't be making this video if that was the case. She does grow as a character throughout the course of the story, and for the most part, it's for the better. She learns how dangerous and wrong her worldviews are. She learns that simply not liking other rich brats doesn't mean she isn't one herself. She becomes more friendly while still keeping a bit of that edge to herself that makes her who she is, and I can't deny that she does grow as a character. However, I'm making this video for a reason. I mentioned in my video about RWBY, but I'm going to talk about here as well. They don't handle the conflict between Weiss and RWBY very well in my opinion. They seemingly make up for a rough first encounter during the initiation test, until they don't, because they decide to make Weiss not like RWBY even after what felt like a heart-to-heart conversation in the forest. But then they quickly squash that conflict after each of them has a conversation with an adult. It's quick and it doesn't make sense. A conflict like this is not one that should go away very quickly. Weiss had every right to be skeptical of RWBY as a team leader. RWBY was clumsy and almost sent them both off the side of a cliff in their first ever encounter. They did nothing but argue when they first became partners in the forest. It doesn't appear that RWBY takes classes seriously, and on top of that, RWBY is 2 years younger than her. For both of their characters, this could have been a very fun conflict to flesh out. Make it more of a rivalry early on in the first volume. Sure, RWBY does prove herself to be a very capable fighter in the forest, but outside of that, all she's really proven to Weiss is that she's clumsy, impulsive, and immature early on. It should take a lot more than just one conversation with a grown-ass man just deciding to dunk on Weiss like Prime Blake Griffin to sway her opinion and accept RWBY as the leader. A dynamic where Weiss doesn't accept RWBY as a leader and RWBY has to prove to Weiss that she can be a leader shouldn't last only a handful of episodes, because had they actually flushed out this conflict, it could have been good for both of their characters, a chance for both of them to grow up and develop chemistry, RWBY becoming a more proven leader over time, Weiss becoming a better teammate and friend over time. What we got instead was a rather rushed conflict that really didn't give the characters room to grow and develop in a way that meant something. The other conflict that I don't think they handled well was the Weiss-Blake conflict. It's revealed toward the end of Volume 1 that Weiss is racist against the Faunus. In fact, she's actually a rather nasty racist against them. From her stereotypical remarks and the bigoted statements about them, to her entire conflict with Blake and the innocent never run comment. Now me personally, I wouldn't have made one of my 4 main protagonists an in-universe racist if I didn't believe I could properly reform that character in an appropriate manner. Clearly the writers of the show disagreed, because they handled this rather poorly. I understand they probably rushed this due to the backlash from the fans, and I understand why the fans gave a lot of backlash, because it is weird to have one of your 4 main protagonists not only be racist, but a rather extreme racist as well in the universe. And I think they realized they bit off a bit more than they could chew. However, it doesn't change the fact that it wasn't handled well. Weiss seemingly gets over her rather extreme racism quickly, like over the course of a few hours. And her apology was pretty weak, if we're being honest, especially when she follows up that weak apology with what she says to Sun. Like, if I was in Blake's shoes in this scenario, I would at best be skeptical of this apology. I think it would have been better if Blake and Weiss actually talked about this more. I know that Weiss shows remorse in later volumes over this, but it would have been nice to see Weiss actually make an effort to reform herself rather than just simply saying a weak apology. Maybe have an actual heart-to-heart conversation with Blake about this, have her ask Blake to help her reform, have Blake explain the history of what she's been through, something, anything, please. While I do like how Weiss grows as a character throughout the series, and I do like the fact she's not racist for the rest of the series, that would have been a real problem. One of my biggest problems with her character arc is that there are points where it feels like they rushed her development instead of actually fleshing out her growth as a character, which is more than likely a product of the cast bloat that pushes the 4 main protagonists to the sidelines, although that's a whole other video for a whole other time. I do think that, like with the conflict that Weiss has with RWBY, the conflict between her and Blake was one that had a lot of potential for both of their characters, and it wasn't fully realized. Most of my problems with Weiss as a character come after Volume 5. Now, I have my problems with Volume 5, because it's Volume 5. However, I feel like they left a lot on the table post Volume 5 in terms of Weiss as a character. From Volumes 6 through 8, it feels like Weiss is not quite herself. She has her moments where she's snappy and shows that personality that makes her who she is, and also an enjoyable character in the first 3 volumes. But for the most part, she's rather sad and doesn't feel like herself. Now, here's the thing. I don't really have a problem with this concept in a vacuum, because let's go over the events Weiss has gone through from the end of Volume 3 to the end of Volume 5. After escaping her family to attend Beacon Academy and developing close friendships, the academy falls. She's forced to return home to her abusive father and isn't allowed to leave the house. She takes matters into her own hands eventually, escapes, then crashes and is kidnapped by bandits. Then she reunites with her closest friend, is told they're going back to the place she just escaped from. Then she almost dies. In a vacuum, I understand why she wouldn't quite be herself after the series of events. But the problem is, outside of her reluctance to return to Atlas and the conflict with her family, the 2 major points that I feel like should be brought up aren't brought up enough, if at all. First of all, she doesn't really even mention the guilt after the death of the pilot who helped her escape, something that should make her feel at least a little guilty. And then her near-death experience is almost never brought up. In fact, I can't even remember if it's brought up after Volume 5, which is something that really bothers me because being on the brink of death is extremely traumatizing. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, but they fail to really even bring it up. There's no reflection on how she needs to learn to balance her summoning and actual combat skills, which is a reason, or at least one of them, that led to her almost dying in the first place. Instead, they just have her rely on the summoning and take away what made her an interesting fighter in combat, like we saw early on in the first 3 volumes. It doesn't feel like she's learned a lesson there. I guess that just fits the theme of the protagonist in the show. Also, nobody around her brings this up as well. The fact that she almost died. I understand Blake not knowing about this because the first time she sees Weiss is after she recovers from that near-death experience, but RWBY and Yang both saw it happen. Even though she ends up surviving, the image of your best friend on the verge of death should leave more of an impact than it did. Having to experience being on the verge of death should have left more of an impact than it did. Instead, they only focus on her dynamics with her family. Even then, it's not like it's a main focus. Weiss is kind of cast to the side in the later volumes. And I'm not saying she should be a focus of everything. Other characters should get time to shine. But like I said in the video about RWBY, one of your 4 main protagonists should be more of a focal point than it feels like the members of Team RWBY are in the actual story. I'm not here to say every single moment needs to be about Weiss or needs to be about trauma. What I am saying is that you have her go through a near-death experience and then it's almost never brought up. It honestly makes that near-death experience feel more like a gimmick than anything else. Like it was just something used to introduce new lore to the series rather than actually have an impact on the story. And I feel like a near-death experience deserves to be more than just a gimmick. On top of everything I just mentioned, Weiss does return to form in a way in Volume 9. It does feel like in Volume 9 she is Weiss again. She has a bit of the edge back again. But at the same time, it also cost her being a awful person in the sense of she neglects her best friend's mental health struggles, whether it was inadvertent or not. It's something that does happen, and trust me, I have a whole video planned for that as well. Like I said in the intro, I think Weiss is the best character on Team RWBY. I also think she's one of the best characters in the show, as well as one of my favorites. However, that can be true, and it can also be true that there are criticisms of her character. With Weiss, I feel like my criticisms of her as a character are also things I could say about the series as a whole. I really like her as a character, but her conflicts with other protagonists feel rushed and underdeveloped. She's pushed to the side at multiple points because of cast bloat. There are easily noticeable points that had potential to be great to capitalize on, but they don't because they care more about something new that they find cool. I think Weiss is a better character than RWBY, but like with RWBY, it's not like I would have had to change much about her that's different from the show to make her a better character in terms of adding new elements. Because the show does lay out real elements that easily could make Weiss a better character. But I feel like with everything I can say now and will continue to in future videos about this series, they don't realize the potential they have already established with these characters or this story.